Joan Donovan, thank you, Joyojit, and everyone there for having me, even though I couldn't make it. But I think we should all be quite happy. I couldn't because of, we want this particular virality is something that none of us want. I joined Twitter back in 2012 because of a case, Shreya Singhal versus the Union of India. It's perhaps still the definitive Supreme Court case on online free speech. It dealt with intermediary liability, website blocking, and the striking down of Section 66A of the Information Technology Act, which at its lowest threshold criminalized speech that was annoying or inconvenient. And these are quotes from the provision itself. So I was a late adopter. Because I wanted to avoid the bitification of my mind into 140 character pieces. And it, I succeeded in some degree, failed in others. A month later, though, a young physiotherapist was gang raped and killed on a bus. And the virality of that movement, and it spread through legacy media and also WhatsApp and Facebook and Twitter. But it resulted in masses of people, old and young men, older and younger women, on the streets and online, saying this is not your problem alone. Violence, rape, sexualization of young women. This was a dream for a Delhi girl, right? But there was a problem. I mean, there were a few problems with that movement. And one of the problems was that politicians were trying to take the easy way out and promising the death penalty for rapists, right? Like that's what they always do when in India and in some other countries, when there's a high profile incident of sexual violence. Now, all evidence shows that not only does it not have a deterrent effect, in states like Georgia and the US, there's even evidence that it increased violent crime when it was reintroduced. So I put out a series of 8 tweets that went viral. The first began "No bloodlust in our name," and it set out the evidence in simple terms. This and many other contributions shifted the conversation. And when we represented the movements sitting with government to draft the anti-rape laws of 2013, we were able to limit the ambit of the death penalty in the new rape laws to some extent, to a significant extent, actually. But virality in the law isn't new at all. The story of us globally is a story of some of our mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers being raped by their husbands, and that sexual assault not being even called rape. The reason it's not called rape is because the law, with its powerful normative force, did not and call it rape in many countries for a very long time, and in India and many other countries still does not call it rape. Now, where did this legal meme begin? This legal meme began in the mind of a man called Lord Matthew Hale. He made it up and put it down in a legal treatise in the 1600s, and it had remarkable success. It traveled with colonialism, on the one hand, to the East, and ended up in countries in India, in Nepal, in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, and also to the West, to the United States, and to the Philippines. Now, what was particularly startling, I found, was that an unreconstructed version of Hale's ghost remains in our jurisprudence today, both in the country that you're in and the country I'm in. Last May, within 10 days of each other, we had the leaked Alito decision from the US Supreme Court in Dobbs versus Jackson, and the Delhi High Court's decision on marital rape. I represented the petitioners in the Indian marital rape case. The decision was split. One was in our favor, one was against. Our appeal will be heard in the Supreme Court on the 9th of May. In the US, Alito cited Hale's treatise 8 times as evidence that abortion wasn't criminal in the United States at the time the US Constitution was written. So both traced back to a colonial era misogyny that the constitutions of India and the United States that guarantee individual rights, the individual rights to privacy of the body. And let's remember that while privacy is not the starting point of a constitutional argument here when it comes to the body, it tends to be dignity. And Article 21, the right to life, the right to a good life, the right to bodily integrity. And Roe versus Wade was squarely founded on the right to privacy. So the individual rights to privacy of the body, to bodily integrity, to free sexual expression, all of this seems to have been overridden by the Constitution. So is it just old laws and old patriarchies that we are dealing with in the law and how it functions today? It's not. As Professor Joyajit Pal has demonstrated extremely effectively through his work with examining the networks of men's rights, the so-called men's rights associations, and how their messages travel and how they go viral. These very much exist today. There's a purported victimization of power, in this case, patriarchal power, that we see across men's rights association movements. We see it in Hindutva movements. We see it in white supremacy movements. The men's rights associations, and I'll let Professor Pal speak about this, I'm sure he'll talk about this during during these 2 days. But these men's rights associations found their way into law and into judgments. How did this happen? Now, not only do they go viral, and it's not an organic virality, it's a constructed virality. Many of our journalists have started looking at Twitter and hashtags and virality as a legitimate source without examining whether it's disinformation that is being spread. For example, the fact that men are victims when it comes to rape, right? When it comes to the crimes of rape and accusations of rape, that men are the primary victims, or other kinds of disinformation. Now, the origin of the marital rape law, Lord Hale's ghost, is disinformation as well. And the question I think that we have before us today is a particularly difficult question. And I'd love to hear what Joan Donovan and others have to say about it, which is, how do we deal with countering this kind of virality? Is it part of the problem, I think, lies in the problem that is at the heart of our global polity. One of the problems that's at the heart of our global polity. The fact that social media is polarized, possibly because hate and inspiration are the things that go viral, and people start talking to, people start thinking and talking in echo chambers, but also that politics, as a result, in significant part, in my view, has been polarized. Is the answer merely to have progressive values, rights, go viral as well? Or is there a better answer? Well, let's look a little bit at how the Men's Rights Association found themselves in the marital rape conversation. Now, there were 2 rounds of this litigation before the High Court. As I said, the 3rd round is coming up before the Supreme Court in the beginning of May. But the 2 rounds were quite different from each other. In the first round, you had the men's rights associations who had intervened, essentially being ignored. Their presence on social media was there, but they weren't particularly they weren't as well organized, I think, and they weren't as, their advocacy wasn't as powerful in the public domain when it came to organization and virality. They found themselves, so in the first round, they were more or less ignored. In the second round, though, the Union of India, the government of India, stepped back and they said, we are not going to counter this. We have a consultation going on with the states, and we would rather that the court defer to that. But in the absence of that deference, we're not going to counter this court case, right? And so the men's rights associations were essentially elevated to being the main counter. Now, with regard to the legal virality, Professor Susan Osterman from Notre Dame Law School and I are writing a paper tracing how marital rape was struck down in England in 1991, in R versus R. By 1993, all 50 US states had gotten rid of this. The story of us, the story of now, includes the story of how to deal with not only misinformation, but the virality of oppression. And I hope that we're able here and in our own work to put our heads together to deal with this, in the law, with the state, but also in the different areas in which we are working today. Thank you.